honor and pleasure of introducing our next speaker for this morning's fantastic Toastmasters Leadership Institute. Prior to doing so, just like in a speech contest, I do want to make sure that our timer has been spotlighted. So distinguished Toastmaster Lepidra Damianos, will you please identify yourself? That way our next speaker could see you and we can make sure that our speaker can pin you as the timer. So be loud and proud for a second, Lepidra. There you are. Wonderful. Just want to make sure that you get the recognition that you deserve, and our next presenter is able to see you during the presentation. Now I am going to introduce our speaker. Toastmasters is not just about communication. Toastmasters is where leaders are made. Critical thinking is an important skill that can be put to use in all aspects of our lives. Critical thinking is a key to career success. Critical thinkers make better decisions. Critical thinking can make you happier. Critical thinking ensures decisions are well informed. Critical thinking improves relationships. Our first presenter of the day will help us to understand and apply critical thinking. Distinguished Toastmaster Godalys Reina first joined the UNA Toastmasters Club just after turning 18 in 1995. She has since received 8 Toastmaster of the Year awards. Wow. For her meritorious community work with the people with disability and the youth. In the Curaçaoan community, she has been awarded the Toastmasters Community Achievement Award by the Achievers Toastmasters Club and the Outstanding Young Person Award for Voluntary and Humanitarian Service from the JCI Dutch Caribbean Organization. In 2010, she became the second Toastmaster of Curaçao to win the Caribbean Evaluation Speech Championship in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Her personal and professional life is where she also puts to practice her critical thinking skills. As the director of Pro Quito, lecturer at the University of the Dutch Caribbean, and her most important leadership role, mother of her 17-year-old son. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our presenter for this morning, past district director and our Region 8 advisor, distinguished Toastmaster, Godalys Reina.
Thank you very much, Austin, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone, and greetings from rainy Curaçao this Saturday morning. I need your help in solving something. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you're seeing my screen, please. Yes, you are. Okay. There are 3 false statements on this sheet. Please help me solve which one they are. Please feel free to unmute yourselves.
2 is false.
Okay. Correct.
4 is also false.
That's correct. And the last one?
6 is false.
Are you sure?
No, 6 is correct.
2 is false.
2 is false. We said 2 is false.
2,
I
4,
heard
and
4.
5.
5.
2, 4, and 5.
No, it's the title.
The title's false.
Okay, let's see. 2 is false. 4 is false. And indeed, the statement, there are 3 false statements, is also false. Thinking is a natural activity to men. We all think. But do you ever wonder how your thinking affects your decisions, your demeanor, the way you see others, and the way you see the world around you? Does your thinking process contribute to the enrichment of your experiences, your conversations, and your quality of life? Did you know that the quality of your life And of that, what we produce, make, or build depends precisely on the quality of our thinking. I can still vividly remember the words of my lecturer for the subject Strategic Decision Analysis in my junior year at the University of the Netherlands Antilles. He said to us, "You are not expected to remember every little fact about this course. What I do expect from you, though, is for you to be able to think and to know how to make connection between ideas and evaluate information critically." I didn't realize at the time, but my lecturer was actually giving a summary of critical thinking. Throughout my studies, other teachers would also give similar speeches when describing what would be expected of us later in college. It's not about the facts that you know, but rather your ability to evaluate them and to put them to use. And now that I am a lecturer in college, I often mention to my students that the ability to think through and solve difficult problems matters more in the real world than specific content. Now, what is critical thinking? According to the foundation of critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and/or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. Now, this definition from the Foundation for Critical Thinking is pretty wordy. But critical thinking, in essence, is not that complex. This definition that I found online says it best. Critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to make your thinking better. Critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to make your thinking better. It makes me wonder what a well-cultivated thinker does. Research shows that a well-cultivated thinker raises vital questions and problems, formulating them clearly and precisely, gathers and assesses relevant information using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively, and thus comes to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them against relevant criteria and standards, thinks open-mindedly within alternative systems of thought, recognizing and assessing as need be their assumptions, implications, and practical consequences, and a well-cultivated thinker also communicates effectively with others in figuring out solutions to complex problems. Two things are crucial. Critical thinking is not just thinking, but thinking that entails self-improvement. And two, this improvement comes from skill in using standards by which one appropriately assesses the thinking process. To put it briefly, it is self-improvement in thinking through standards that assesses the thinking process. Truth is that most of us are not what we could be. We have great capacity, but most of that capacity is dormant. Most is undeveloped. Improvement in thinking is like improvement in basketball, in ballet, in playing the saxophone, or in public speaking. It is unlikely to take place in the absence of conscious commitment to learn. And truth is that as long as we take our thinking for granted, we we don't do the work required for it to be improved. Now, how do we develop thinking? It's important to realize that development in thinking requires a gradual process and of learning, and it's just plain hard work. It's not possible to become an excellent thinker simply because one wants it. Changing our habits of thought as a long range project happens over years, not weeks and not months. The essential traits of a critical thinker require an extended period of development. How then can we develop as critical thinkers? How can we help ourselves and others to practice better thinking in our everyday life? I'm going to share with you this morning 9 strategies that any motivated person can use to develop him or herself as a thinker. First, use wasted time. Second, tackle a problem a day. Third, internalize intellectual standards. 4, keep an intellectual journal. 5, reshape your character. 6, deal with your ego. 7, redefine the way you see things. 8, get in touch with your emotions. And 9, analyze group influences on your life. I'm now going to talk about each of these 9 points. First strategy, how to use wasted time. We all waste some time. Sometimes we fail to plan well, causing us negative consequences we could easily have avoided. For example, we spent time unnecessarily trapped in traffic, though we could have left half an hour earlier to avoid the rush. Or sometimes we worry about things beyond our scope of control. At times, we spend time regretting what is past. Or sometimes we just stare blankly into the space. It's important to understand that the time we spent doing all these things is gone, even though we had thought about it and considered our options. And if we had done it, we've probably never have deliberately spent that time the way we did. So why not take advantage of the time you normally waste by practicing your critical thinking during that otherwise wasted time? For example, instead of sitting in front of the TV at the end of the day, flicking from channel to channel in vain search of a program worth watching, spend that time, or at least part of it, thinking back over your day and evaluating your strengths and your weaknesses. For example, you might ask yourself questions like, when did I do my worst thinking today? When did I do my best? What, in fact, did I think about today? Did I figure anything out? Did I allow any negative thinking to frustrate me unnecessarily? If I had to repeat today, what would I do differently and why? Did I do anything today to further my long-term goals? Did I act according with my own expressed values? If I spent every day this way for the next 10 years, would I at the end have accomplished something worthy of that time? It's important, of course, to take a little time with each question. It would also be useful to record your observations so that you are forced to spell out details and be explicit in what you recognize and see. As time passes, you will notice changed patterns in your thinking. Second strategy, a problem a day. At the beginning of each day, perhaps while driving to work or going to drop the kids off at school, choose a problem to work on when you have free moments. Figure out the logic of the problem by identifying its elements. In other words, systematically think through the questions. What is exactly the problem? How can I put into the problem into the form of a question? How does this relate to my goals, my purposes, and my needs? Whenever possible, take problems one by one. State the problem as clearly and precisely as you can. Think about the problem. Study the problem to make clear the kind of problem you are dealing with. Figure out, for example, what sorts of things are you going to have to do to solve it? Distinguish problems over which you have some control from problems over which you have no control. Set aside the problems over which you have no control, concentrating your efforts on those problems that you can potentially solve. Figure out the information that you need and actively seek that information. Evaluate your options, taking into account their advantages and disadvantages in the situation that you're in. You can also adopt a strategic approach to the problem and follow through on that strategy. This may involve direct action or a carefully thought out wait and see strategy. And when you act, monitor the implications of your action as they begin to emerge. Be ready at a moment's notice to revise your strategy if the situation requires it. And be prepared to shift your strategy or your analysis or statement of the problem or all three as more information about the problem becomes available to you. The third strategy, internalize intellectual standards. Each week, you can develop a heightened awareness of one of the universal intellectual standards, which are clarity, precision, accuracy, relevance, depth, logicalness, significance. Focus 1 week on, let's say, clarity, and the next on accuracy. For example, if you're focusing on clarity for the week, try to notice when you are being unclear. Unclear in communicating to others, or unclear when trying to understand what others are saying to you. Notice when others are unclear in what they're saying. When you're reading, notice whether you are clear about what you're reading. When you orally express or write out your views for whatever reason, ask yourself whether you're clear about what you're trying to say. In doing this, of course, focus on the following 4 techniques of clarification. Stating what you're saying, state it explicitly and precisely with careful consideration, and giving also thoughts to the choice of words, elaborating on your meaning, in other words, giving examples of what you mean from experiences you've had, and also using analogies, metaphors, pictures, or diagrams to illustrate what you mean. In other words, you will frequently state, elaborate, illustrate, and exemplify your points. You will regularly ask others to do the same. Strategy number 4, my favorite, keep an intellectual journal. Each week, write out a certain number of journal entries, and you can use the following format. First, you describe a situation that is or was emotionally significant to you. something that you deeply care about. Try to focus on one situation at a time. Second, your response. Describe what you did in response to that situation. Be specific and exact. Third, analysis. Then analyze in the light of what you have written, what precisely was going on in the situation. Dig beneath the surface. And fourth, assess the implication of your analysis. What did you learn about yourself? What would you do differently if you could relive the situation? The fifth strategy, reshape your character. Choose one intellectual trait, for instance, intellectual perseverance, autonomy, empathy, courage, humility, to strive for each month, focusing on how you can develop that trait in yourself. For example, concentrating on intellectual humility, begin to notice when you admit that you're wrong. Notice when you refuse to admit that you're wrong, even in the face of glaring evidence that you are in fact wrong. Notice when you become defensive when another person tries to point out a deficiency in your work or your thinking. Notice when your intellectual arrogance keeps you from learning. For example, when you say to yourself, I already know everything I need to know about this subject, or I know as much as he does. Who does he think he is forcing his opinions on me? By owning your ignorance, you can begin to deal with it. Strategy number 6, deal with your egocentrism. Egocentric thinking is found in the disposition in human nature to think with an automatic subconscious bias in favor of oneself. On a daily basis, you can begin to observe your egocentric thinking by contemplated questions like these. Under what circumstances do I think with a bias in favor of myself? Did I ever become irritable over small things? Did I do or say anything irrational to get my way? Did I try to impose my will upon others? Did I ever fail to speak my mind when I felt strongly about something, then later felt resentment? Once you identify egocentric thinking and operation, you can then work to replace it with more rational, thought-through, systematic self-reflection, thinking along the lines of, what would a rational person feel in this or that situation? What would a rational person do? How does that compare with what I want to do? Strategy number 7, redefine the way you see things. We live in a world, both personal and social, in which every situation is given a meaning. How a situation is defined determines not only how we feel about it, but also how we act in it and what implication it has for us. However, virtually every situation can be defined in more than one way. This realization carries with it tremendous opportunities because in principle, it lies within your power to make your life more happy and fulfilling than it actually is. Many of the negative definitions that we give to situations in our lives could in principle be transformed into positive ones. We can be happy when otherwise we have been sad. We can be fulfilled when otherwise we would have been frustrated. In this strategy, we practice redefining the way we see things, turning negatives into positives, dead ends into new beginnings, mistakes into opportunities to learn. Now, to make this strategy practical, We should create some specific guidelines for ourselves. For example, we might make ourselves a list of 5 to 10 recurrent negative contexts in which we feel frustrated, angry, unhappy, or worried. We could then identify the definition in each case that is at the root of the negative emotion. We would then choose a plausible alternative definition for each and then plan for new responses as well as new emotions. For example, if you tend to worry about all problems, both the ones you can do something about and those that you can't, you can review the thinking in this nursery rhyme. For every problem under the sun, there's a solution or there's none. If there be one, think till you find it. If there be none, then never mind it. Strategy 8, getting in touch with your emotions. Whenever you feel a negative emotion, and especially if it's systematically, ask yourself, what exactly is the thinking leading to this emotion? For example, if you're angry, ask yourself what the thinking is behind this emotion that's making me angry. What other ways could I think about the situation? Can you think about the situation so as to see the humor in it? And what is possible in it? If you can, concentrate on that thinking and your emotions will eventually shift to match it. Strategy 9, analyze group influences in your life. Closely analyze the behavior that is encouraged and discouraged in the groups to which you belong. For any given group, what are you required to believe? What are you forbidden to do? Every group enforces some level of conformity. Most people live much too much within the views of themselves projected by others. Discover what pressure you are bowing to and think explicitly about whether or not to reject that pressure. The key point to keep in mind when devising strategies is that you are engaged in a personal experiment. You are testing ideas in your everyday life. You're integrating them and building them in light of your actual experience. For example, suppose you find a strategy redefine the way you see things to be intuitive to you. So you take that to begin. Pretty soon you'll find yourself noticing the social definitions that rule many situations in your life. You recognize how your behavior is shaped and controlled by the definitions you use. For example, I'm giving a party. Everyone therefore knows to act in a partying way. Or the funeral is on Tuesday. There's a specific social behavior expected at the funeral. Or Lisa is an acquaintance, not really a friend. We behave very differently in the two cases. You will begin to see how important and pervasive social definitions are. You will begin to redefine situations in ways that run contrary to some commonly accepted definitions. You will notice then how redefining situations and relationships enables you to get in touch with your emotions. You recognize that the way you think, that is, define things, generates the emotions that you experience. For instance, when you think that you're threatened, you feel fear. If you define a situation as a failure, you may feel depressed. On the other hand, if you define that same situation as a lesson or an opportunity to learn, you feel empowered to learn. Now that we thought about the 9 strategies, we can choose how to integrate one with other strategies and improve critical thinking along the way. You will then become a critical thinking in practice or a practicing thinker. Your practice will bring advancement, and with advancement, skilled and insightful thinking may become more and more natural to you. Now in Toastmasters, we get offered many opportunities to develop and practice critical thinking skills. During an educational meeting, you can assume roles in which you can practice critical thinking. For instance, speech evaluator. As a speech evaluator, you should listen carefully to a speaker presenting a manual speech, then offer suggestions for improvement and comments on what the speaker did well. A grammarian. As the grammarian, you listen to the speaker's use of language and grammar, noting grammatical mistakes, as well as examples of good word usage, and of course, offer suggestions for improvement. And the general evaluator. There you will have the opportunity to evaluate everything that takes place during the entire meeting, commenting on areas that need improvement and on the other aspects of the meeting that went well. Now I want us to practice critical thinking one more time. And for this part, I'm going to share with you a situation that I saw happening in one of my clubs. I'm going to share the screen. Listen to the story, and I want you to share your thoughts. A member was asked to deliver an icebreaker speech, or the member asked the Vice President of Education to put him on the roster to deliver his icebreaker. For this speech, he talked about hurricanes. The evaluator, when was the time to present the evaluation for the speech, recommended him to redo the project. This was a member, it was about 2 years ago, and he was delivering a speech from the Legacy program. Remember the Competent Communicator Manual. Do you agree with the evaluator? And why? Do you agree with the evaluator? Please feel free to unmute your microphone.
It was an icebreaker speech?
Right, it was an icebreaker.
I thought it was very inappropriate. I don't think that's something you should do. This is their first speech. It takes a lot for a person to even stand up there to do something like that. So I would have gave them as much kudos as I can, and then privately, still not making them do over their speech, but talk about some other points where they can improve. And then if they choose to do it again, then they can do it again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think the evaluator asked the member to redo the project?
My guess is it's because it was not about it wasn't a personal message.
Mm-hmm.
The icebreaker is supposed to be an introduction about yourself. But obviously, hurricanes are important to the member, so it did actually introduce the person.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, many times I heard in my previous years that the icebreaker speech from the Legacy program is supposed to be about you. Let's take a look at the objectives of the icebreaker speech in the Legacy program. Share my screen for the last time. Okay. And what does it say? It says, the objectives are to begin speaking before an audience and to discover speaking skills you already have and skills that need some attention. Now, is it required to talk about yourself? It's a suggestion, or it was a suggestion from the Legacy program. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has helped you to gain some idea on how you can improve your thinking process and start implementing critical thinking skills. I am working on journaling my thinking process and trying to become better dealing with my emotions when things happen. I hope you do this too, and it has fruit for you in terms of your leadership